Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And gaming as a hobby, as a phenomenon, as a whatever, has existed for several decades. And we enjoy all sorts of wonderful conveniences of online gaming, offline gaming, portable and home releases, but gaming in its classic form exists in something that's kind of difficult to find these days, and that's the arcade.
Yeah, this is a two-man gripe about being old in the gaming space episode. At least a little bit.
Light curmudgeoning.
Light curmudgeoning. And actually, like, I was revisiting a lot of this information because I'm a fan of the Gaming Historian on YouTube. If you don't follow him, you should. He does some really great long-form for YouTube documentary pieces on all sorts of gaming, and his most recent one was actually on Punch-Out, which originated in the arcades.
Yeah, and just as when things cross-promote or you find a movie that was based off of a book or a musical that was based off of a poem or whatever, it's almost easy to forget some games having their origins in the arcade.
Yeah.
And it was very fun watching the Gaming Historian's retrospective on Punch-Out. I knew that it existed as an arcade game before it was released for the NES, but I didn't realize how long before. I think it was 1982.
Yeah, there was a huge, it was pretty much the next arcade after Donkey Kong.
Yeah, it was one of their first ones. And it's sort of, and I guess this is that sort of thing of Matt and I are gamers in our 30s. So for us, the early memories are NES. And it's like, there's arcade stuff that exists before that, and it's all just kind of a vague whatever.
Right, but also arcades perpetuated after that too. Something that was really great about the Xbox 360 generation is that a lot of really classic arcade games were re-released on the 360. The Simpsons arcade, the X-Men arcade game, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade.
The original one or Turtles in Time?
Both. The original Turtles arcade was the original game. Turtles in Time was a remaster bullshit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they did all that crap too.
But, I grew up going to arcades. When I was probably in single digits, 6 or 7, I would go down to the Jersey Shore with my parents all the time. And there was always this one deli that was right off the beach that had 2 arcade machines in it, The Simpsons and X-Men. And my parents would drop me off with $20 and just leave me for a few hours, and I would beat both games.
You can't get away with that nowadays.
No.
For so many reasons.
For a lot of reasons. But, I remember loving essentially effectively side-scrolling beat-em-ups, for console players, thinking of your Streets of Rage and more recently your Scott Pilgrim game and things like that originated in the arcades. And
yeah, well, they were meant to get your quarters.
Right. And so it would be just hard enough that you would die just frequently enough that you have to drop in a ton more quarters to keep playing to beat the game. Because the difficulty was not in strategy, it was just throwing your face at it until you finished it.
And there was some strategy involved.
Some.
I remember the 6-person X-Men arcade game being at one of the Lowe's theaters in my hometown, and it had to have been high school. Us one day just deciding we are getting through this game. We're getting through at least a full loop of it.
Right.
And it was 4 or 5 of us. It's hard to remember at this point. We each picked a character and we just kept going. And, some of us lasted longer than others, but you beat that game not to see the ending, but just to get through it at least once. And then you're like, all right, how much money did I spend on that?
Yeah, the arcades were the original local co-op,
Yes.
And before that, on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo, there was no real way to play with 4 players on one game, with some minor exceptions. But for sure, the arcades had that all the time, especially for the beat-em-ups, and then even the fighting games were always 2-on-2. And so many game franchises originated in the arcade before they went to home console. Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter were both arcade games first.
Oh, yeah.
And then they came to home console. And there was a huge difference between the two. You don't realize the gap in it. The reason I brought up the Gaming Historian earlier is because when I was watching his thing on Punch-Out, I didn't realize Punch-Out was an arcade first, but more importantly, the Punch-Out on arcade and the Punch-Out on NES are wildly different.
Yes, they are.
And I never realized that until I watched this history video, because I have a nostalgia memory of Punch-Out, where I remember playing it on the NES all the time, and then I was like, yeah, sure, I remember the arcade, but it wasn't until I watched this video that I realized how very different they were.
Oh yeah, and NES was still in that time where it was arcade adaptations.
Right.
That's really where Sega kind of made its bread and butter, because they were arcade makers, and a lot of their stuff for the Genesis was arcade perfect.
Yeah.
Or certainly much more arcade perfect than something like the NES was, where, I grew up playing Ninja Gaiden and Double Dragon, and those started as arcade titles, and they do look a great deal different. They play different, they are different. The NES had to shrink it down.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the NES certainly wasn't the first or last system to do that. All of the glut of systems that happened before that, ones that went on before the Crash, the Intellivision, the Atari, the Fairchild Channel F, the whatever, those guys were all trying to bring the arcade experience home.
Yeah, I mean, games like Pac-Man and Space Invaders and Centipede, all of these games, Tempest, all of these games were arcades first. And what's interesting to me about arcade cabinets and arcades in general is that you'd think there'd be a bigger interest in it now. And now there are, in many cities, a version of a barcade, which is a bar and an arcade, all over the country. I know there's a bunch on the West Coast. There are a bunch here on the East Coast.
There are several barcades in New York City.
Yeah. And it's a great idea to not charge for those games, to have a feeder where you can just get lives, but then charge booze and people show up and play games and drink. Mm-hmm. But like, I miss the old arcade experience, because there were also games that I just felt were more fun and more intuitive in the arcade. And there were some games that didn't translate well at all. Like for me, I don't hate first-person shooters. I've come to like them. Mm. I'm not always great at them. But one of my favorite arcade games of all time was Time Crisis 3. Yeah. Time Crisis 3, for those who don't know, the Time Crisis series was a game that was revolutionary for light gun shooter games because it had a cover system.
Yep.
You would step on a pedal to dive in and out of cover, and you would shoot off screen to refill your ammo. And I remember sinking so many hours into Time Crisis. I remember they released it on the PlayStation 2, I think. With
Time Crisis 3 was on PS2.
Yeah, with 2 light guns and like a strip that you put on your TV.
The Gun Con.
It was so bootleg, but just to be able to play it at home, it was so much fun.
I was a very big light gun game fanatic.
Yeah.
I mean, I still love those games. Area 51 isn't a great light gun game, but it's a favorite of mine. For the PS1, I had so many light gun games, and I had gotten my hands on... I'm going to look this up so I can get the brand correct. It was a light gun that was the size and shape of a Desert Eagle. Oh, had a little slide lock that when you pulled the trigger, it would actually move. And it was GunCon 2 compatible, as well as Justifier compatible, I believe. The Konami Justifier.
Yeah, I mean, all of these light gun games, the most infamous light gun game was, of course, House of the Dead 2, which had some of the best, worst voice acting in the history of gaming.
Yeah, it was no typing of the dead, though.
No. But a lot of those games, I remember, there are certain kinds of games that existed in the arcade that were so different from the console versions. Like every racing game that had a console part felt completely different to sitting in a moving chair that rumbled while you had a physical steering wheel in your hand.
Yeah, and anyone who played Cruisin' USA on the N64 remembers what a porting disaster that was.
So awful.
And so as consoles got better and were able to more accurately emulate the arcade experience, where we then went was... I don't want to say peripheral happy, but it kind of was. Those things it's hard to bring these things home.
Right.
So yeah, definitely racing games. I mean, my big formative, you would not believe, arcade experience, quintessential, Dance Dance Revolution.
Sure, for those who didn't have 2 left feet.
Look, you learned. I learned. I have put so much money into those machines. Yeah. I mean, the name of this podcast is based off of the arcade fun and games that used to be at Willowbrook Mall in Wayne, New Jersey, where throughout high school I would go most Friday nights along with several friends, and I would probably have $20, and that would get me food court, dollar menu, whatever, and we'd bum around the mall. And I'd play some pinball. I'd play some of whatever was around in the arcade. There's some great stuff. But I also played the hell out of Dance Dance Revolution. I started with Third Mix, which it's so weird to look at that stuff now because even though there's still DDR-ish things that come out, that was before the games were 60 FPS.
Yeah, it's true.
And in 5th Mix, I think, was when it switched to that, maybe 5th, if not DDR Max, the 6th iteration.
Kids, if you don't know what DDR is, it's Just Dance, but like better.
It's Just Dance where instead of having a camera, you're stepping on buttons with your feet.
Yeah.
And no, that was one where I would go with various friends, like a whole community of people. I went to DDR tournaments, in particular at 8 on the Break in Dunellen, which is an arcade that is still around. It's wonderful. It's been around forever.
We need to record a video for YouTube of us just going to an arcade and playing old games.
Oh, yeah. Actually, going to 8 on the Break would be a lot of fun because they have a lot of rhythm games.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I had Guitar Hero on console first, but every time I saw it in the arcades after the fact, I became obsessed with it playing in the arcade. And that's an interesting thing that I've noticed over the last couple of years is now arcades are doing the opposite. And actually a big competitor in the arcade space lately who wasn't for a long time is Nintendo. They were in the early days and now they're coming back. There's a multiplayer Luigi's Mansion arcade, which I've played.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's got a vacuum gun that you hold and the screen. It's like a light gun, but you suck up ghosts on the screen.
Yeah.
There's Mario Kart, sit and seat, hold steering wheel
right,
racing
those I've
games.
seen, yeah, Grand Prix.
Which also features Pac-Man. I think the first time to feature Pac-Man in a Nintendo crossover before Smash Brothers.
Oh, dang.
But yeah, all these games now that I'm seeing, they're porting modern games now into arcade versions, which I think is really interesting.
Well, some of the really interesting ones are they're translating phone games to the arcade.
Fruit Ninja.
Fruit Ninja, if you've been to a Dave & Buster's lately.
You've seen Fruit Ninja.
Yeah, well, and even at... when I went to a video game con, a number of the cabinets that I have are also ones that you would recognize down at Chinatown Fair, one of the few arcades left in Manhattan, is Groove Coaster. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I don't know how to pronounce it. Jubeat, Jubeat. And that game, as well as a number of others that are phone rhythm games that are now on larger scale because there's that fun thing of there's kind of a weird back and forth of arcades started with an experience that you can't replicate at home because of technology, right? And then home caught up, and now it's more of a technology of we all had that phase where we all had a bunch of Guitar Hero Rock Band instruments, and then realized this is stupid. Oh my God, this is so stupid.
Yeah, if I actually calculated how much money I spent on Rock Band 1, 2, and 3, Rock Band Beatles, Guitar Hero Metallica, Rock Band 4, Rock Band Beatles, and all of the downloaded songs, plus the 4 different guitar controllers, 2 different drum sets, 3 or 4 different microphones, I probably spent over $2,000 just on that game series.
Right, and it's not that it's bad.
It's just insane how much stuff there was.
There was so much stuff. And we live in apartments.
Yes.
Maybe some people have all sorts of storage space that can store all those instruments. I know they do.
Yeah.
And you know what? If they want to hold on to that stuff, please do.
Yes.
Enjoy it. Keep it all. Keep the flame alive. But sometimes there are things that are an arcade experience that should not come home.
No.
Now look, this is speaking as somebody who still has his red octane DDR pads.
Sure.
And there is an electronics store near my apartment that has metal pads.
Oh, the fancy ones.
The fancy ones, and I keep almost buying them. Which just, you know what? You pick it. And that's something that I like about arcades and about arcade cabinets in general because yesterday, I went to a party that was held at a bar in Midtown that had a bunch of pinball machines. It wasn't meant to be an arcade. It wasn't anything else. It was just a piece of the entertainment there.
Right.
And so there are so many places still that'll have a single cabinet, maybe 2. And then if you want to play a game or 2, that's all you've got.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked at length about the problems of backlogs.
Yeah.
And if you go into a room that is filled with arcade machines, sometimes you're fucked for choice.
Yeah.
Or sometimes there's only 1 or 2 things in what you want to be playing. So, we were Matt, you and I were talking before we started recording about getting into fighting games.
Yes.
And sort of that idea of like, well, which game do I get into? Which game do I try? If you go to the arcade and everybody's playing on the new Soul Calibur machine, well, I guess if you want to get good, you're going to play Soul Calibur.
Sure.
Or whatever, the Tekken cabinet or anything like that. And that makes the choice harder and easier. You know, which racing game do I get into? Well, you got this version of Initial D going on. Oh, wait, and I get the card? Do they still do that? They did that when I was...
I don't know.
They were doing that when I was younger. But those are the things I remember that are a unique experience, and it's in-room community.
Yeah.
It's sort of... You know, you could trash talk all kinds of fun ways in the arcade because you had accountability. Because you're yelling at the dude who's right next to you.
Yeah.
And there's immediate feedback.
Yeah, it's the thing is that's interesting about arcades is in the Nintendo, Super Nintendo generation, the arcades had better graphics. All the games in the arcades were better graphics, better music, better everything.
Better all sorts of stuff.
But once we got to Genesis and beyond, the generation, let's say PlayStation, N64, that generation, and Xbox, we were slowly moving towards home consoles being better than the graphical fidelity of a lot of these cabinets, or at least equal. Mm-hmm. And that phased out a lot of these cabinets because you couldn't just rely on looking better. You had to be better too and offer something more.
Right.
The good thing was for Street Fighter fans is that for the most part, when a new video game version came out, a new arcade version came out, they were usually hand in hand. The arcade usually still led the way. I think it wasn't until the return to consoles with Street Fighter 4 that they had done a console first. I think everything before that had always been arcades first. For Alpha and Third Strike, all of them arcades first, and then they were ported to consoles.
And it's an interesting thing where even to the point where it's not necessarily like, oh, we needed to figure out how to put it on consoles. It just, for something like Street Fighter and something with this big of a history of Street Fighter, I guess it felt right.
Yeah.
Or you got all your balancing issues done and out of the way. Because if someone has bought a game and bring it home, they brought it home, you can patch it, you can update it, but it still feels all kinds of weird. There are update kits that happen to arcade cabinets that it doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't feel like as big of a deal.
Right.
And again, you've bought the cabinet, you've bought the housing, you've bought all that stuff. And so there's an interesting level of, some of those things are modular, some of them are not.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting sort of, you can test out all kinds of kinks and worries in the arcade, release some patches there, and then release the console version. And then the console version are going to be like, all right, this is what I'm taking home, because very few of us have arcade cabinets in our home. Or maybe there are a lot of people that have them in their home. I don't personally know them.
Me neither. And it's funny because I think me and Geoff are of a generation where, like, young gamers, that was the dream, is to have a basement devoted to gaming, walls lined with games, and then another wall lined with arcade cabinets.
Yes.
And, like, the reality is it's probably more feasible now to buy and put one in than it was when we were younger. But still, it's like, who's got the space? We both live in New York. And also the time. Like, and also for me, a lot of those games are now available on console or ported to the PC. And it's like, why am I going to buy this giant cabinet? Like, I remember the Neo Geo arcade machines that had like 30 games on them. Mm-hmm. Metal Slug, Samurai Showdown, Final Fight, all of that stuff. But, you know, and so you would just go and play all of those different games. But once they found out a way to put that all on a disc that you could bring home, there was no reason to want an SNK machine like that.
Although the Neo Geo community is strong and insane.
Yeah, no, absolutely crazy. The reason those games still live on and keep coming out and new iterations is because of that community.
Oh, yeah, no. Anytime I acquire a new system or think about getting a new system, it requires a lot of deliberation.
Yeah.
Because that opens up the door for collecting accessories, collecting games, you know, what sort of collection do I want? Why is it important? What's going on here?
Right.
And it's one thing to get a Nintendo console that I didn't already have.
Right.
I have all of them already. Well, the one in particular that like comes to mind in that example is the Sega Saturn.
Sure.
I have the Genesis, I have the CD, I have the Game Gear, I have the Dreamcast. 32X can, if it happens, it happens. I don't care.
Right.
But the Sega Saturn is a very interesting piece, and there's all sorts of games that came out for it that aren't readily accessible elsewhere, and it's all very cool. Now, that's one, so I deliberate about that a lot.
Right, because that's a new experience that you can't get from any of the other hardware.
Right. But I look at collecting for the Neo Geo. And there are some great stuff. There's amazing things to be had there. There's all kinds of cool stuff. There's a very supportive community and figuring out like what are counterfeits and what are this and what are that.
Right.
Oh my God. The amount of time, the amount of money, and what you will or will not get out of it. Like the initial buy-in, you practically have to buy an arcade cabinet or all the skeleton pieces of one to hope to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And you're right. There are better ways now. In fact, there are now 3/4 size arcade cabinets being sold at GameStop.
Yeah, actually, Neo Geo, I saw an ad the other day, just released
the Neo Geo Mini.
Right, which is a working miniature arcade cabinet, which is mind-blowing. But you can also plug it into your TV and play it on your TV.
And it has controller support.
It does have controller support.
Gerard, the completionist, did a mini review of it after his Arkham Origins video.
Yep, that's where I saw it as well.
Yeah.
And like, you know, things like that are pretty amazing. I mean, there was a time where, like, I think the first time I had this feeling was with the regular Nintendo DS. When they released Mario 64 on the DS with updated graphics and new characters, I remember sitting there going, like, 5 years ago, I was playing this on a TV. Now I'm taking it with me. And it's this idea that we've come along so far.
Yeah.
And why I think it's really cool that, like, the Switch is released that Capcom Beat 'em Up collection.
SNK just came out with a collection that's a lot of their older arcade titles.
Yep. And, like, so you can play these games portable now. They used to play on a giant honking machine at one point.
And what I run into with this sometimes is something very unfortunate. A lot of these games were made to be quarter munchers.
Yes.
They were made to take your money, and that was the challenge, that was the worry, that was the everything. And a lot of NES games were designed from that philosophy. They had to kind of move away from it a little, but there was still sometimes limited continues, or there was a sense of how far back you would go if you lost, but that was built in. But those older titles that are just relentless, if you can just hit a shoulder button to give yourself a free credit every time, a lot of those titles, to me, lose their luster. Not all of them.
Yeah.
But a number of them were just kind of like oh, okay.
Well, the side-scrolling beat-em-ups we were talking about earlier, the original Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, and Simpsons, if you have unlimited continues, you can beat each of those games in an hour.
Right. There are those ones where it's a battle of attrition. It's not necessarily skill.
Yeah.
I enjoy playing Bubble Bobble, both the NES and the arcade version. Bubble Bobble is one of my favorite games of all time, so that's a very biased thing. But one where you can kind of feed credits in there, okay, cool. You're beating it room by room. It's not, you can have setbacks on that.
On the same token, though, like so on the Switch, you can get, if you buy the online, you get access to a ton of Nintendo games, as we were talking last week. One of the games they have is the original Donkey Kong, and so I went to play it, and I got most of the way through the first stage. I got right near Donkey Kong, and I got hit by a barrel and died. And then I had to start at the beginning of the stage at the bottom again. And I was like, screw this, I'm done. And like the reality is, A, I don't have the patience for Donkey Kong. I was never very good at it. But B, it's like, it's a testament to the current generation of gaming. Like, there's no checkpoint. You got to complete the stage. If you can't complete the stage, you got to start over. Yeah. Which is not a mentality that really exists now with a lot of games.
Some games can carry that mentality into their design now. Yeah. And no, there's plenty of games that whether old or newer, that if you have a setback, if you die, I'm okay with it. Right. Like, I'm fine with I've got to start this stage over. Yeah. It depends on how long the stage. Like, if I have to go back 5 stages, that's a little harder. I mean, speaking of Donkey Kong, I still play through the Game Boy Donkey Kong so very much. And if you haven't played it, and if you have the means, you, Matt, and any listener, it's fantastic. It starts off with the original arcade version, and it was an old enough Game Boy game that you thought it was just going to be just a really faithful recreation, and then it just opens up into this insane platform puzzle game. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
It's good fun, and that's one where Mario titles in general, it's very easy to get an abundance of lives, and I guess game overs don't matter as much there. So I don't know where I'm going with that. It's a little bit of, I'm just kind of musing on the idea of limited lives and challenge within games, and whether or not there is fun in overcoming the challenge or fun in just outdoing the war of attrition it puts you through.
Right, which is why I think a lot of fighting games always lasted longer in arcades than anything else. Because racing games as well, because of the inherent competition and
the human element,
and like the human element, and also there's a clear end.
Yeah,
like if you lose, you're done. It's over. It's the next person's turn, and the satisfaction of putting your quarters up on the cabinet so people know you're next.
And there's still classic arcade titles that at the barcade that I do go to in Chelsea, there's a couple of titles there that I really enjoy. Whenever I'm there, I'm like, all right, I got to play a couple of rounds of Joust.
Yes.
And maybe that's just because I didn't play Joust that much when I was a kid.
Yeah.
That was not an arcade title that was in whatever arcades I ended up in. And so, I mean, I knew plenty about it. And so getting to play it now as an adult, it's like, this is a good challenge.
Yeah.
It's also one of those that it's still a quarter.
Yeah.
So that's a place where I can walk in there with $10, get myself a beer and get a couple of bucks of quarters, if I get there on happy hour. And if I play 3 rounds of Joust, maybe that only takes me 2 minutes. Maybe that takes me 10 minutes.
Right.
But it didn't cost that much. And maybe that's just speaking with adult money.
Sure. I think also like the classic arcades, I like the challenge of certain ones that like I might not have as a kid. Like if there's a Space Invaders cabinet, or if there is a Tron cabinet, like these are all games that are not necessarily good or bad. They're all okay, but I will play, or Breakout. Like these are just games that I like playing, and I'll sink a couple quarters into.
So this I feel it is my marital duty to talk about this. Galaga.
Oh, yes, Galaga.
My wife loves Galaga.
Really?
Yes. She had a copy of it, I believe, for the Game Boy. If it wasn't the Game Boy, it was something else. So she got to practice a lot at home. And nowadays, anytime there is a Galaga cabinet somewhere, or more accurately, it's usually a Ms. Pac-Man Galaga cabinet.
Right, because they're usually combined.
They're usually combined. It's the Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. I'm at that combination Galaga and Pac-Man. She'll play it.
Yeah.
Like, even it's like we have very important things to do, or we're talking about this, she'll see that and just goes, excuse me.
Yeah.
And she'll go play. And she's damn good at it.
That was me with Miss Pac-Man. I had Miss Pac-Man for the Atari.
And what's something fun about that is the fact that depending upon whether it's an arcade where it's well kept, or it's played a lot, or it's not played a lot.
Yeah.
She'll do better or worse depending upon just how well kept the machine is.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of it. Like, she'll get frustrated if the stick's loose and it like kind of lists to one side. It's like, all right, I can't get any of the shots I want to make off. But she tries. And we run into that too with pinball, which is another weakness of Sarah's. I like pinball.
I like it too. I'm no good at it. I like playing it, but I am terrible at it.
I am so much better at pinball than I was a few years ago because of Sarah.
Oh, really?
Yes, because one of her favorite places to go is the Pinball Museum in Asbury Park, where you pay by time.
Right.
It's like $12 for half the day.
Yeah.
So for like 6 hours or something. So, and then it's all free play and all the pinball machines. And it's stuff from the 20s all the way to things that are coming out now. And there's not many companies making pinball machines now. Jersey Jack being one of the big ones. I mean, there's still a few. And so just observing her playing. And there's machines, Medieval Madness in particular is the one that is her current obsession. And we're actually trying to... now that the Williams tables and everything have gone under new ownership, and I think it's Zen Pinball, the table will be coming out soon on the Switch, so we'll probably have to get it.
That's nice.
Yeah, and so I'm a lot better at pinball now just by observing all of her tactics and tricks and realizing all of the skill stuff that goes on.
Yeah.
And it's funny to play those machines at the pinball museum where people can just go nuts.
Yeah.
And you can get drunk on the boardwalk and wander in there and just play and play and play and play. And then at Barcade, they very recently started having pinball machines. And there was one or two. There was one that they had that was from the 80s, Fire. It was, you were firemen putting out a fire kind of thing. And I had played that at the pinball museum and I really liked it. And I'd known the table a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to try this. And I was shocked at how responsive it was because you got to pay to play it.
Right.
So people aren't playing it constantly.
Right.
So it's very funny. And when you get to high level video game play, like tournament fighting games and things like that, everybody is very particular about their controllers, about their sticks, about whatever.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to have to take into account sort of what the public does to all of these things. You know, playing DDR machines where the speakers have gotten blown out or anything.
Well, yeah, because it's much more hardware related because it's not one system playing multiple things. It's one system playing that one thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I think some of the most depressing things is where you go up to a like a 4 to 6 person player beat 'em up arcade game, and like 3 of the characters are crossed off because a button's missing or the joystick's busted. And it's like, but that's my favorite character, because a lot of these old games didn't have character selects. Whichever position you put the quarters in is the character you played as.
Oh yeah.
And like, so if the for the Simpsons game, if Marge had black tape over her thing, you couldn't play as Marge. You could only play as the other characters.
The only one that worked on X-Men was Dazzler. Go be Dazzler.
Oh, Dazzler.
Dazzler was never broken. I wonder why.
Because nobody played Dazzler. She was the worst. I'm sorry, but every time I think of that X-Men game, all I can think of, I hear it in my head, clear as a bell, is Colossus's super where he yells. Like every time, clears a bell. That and Magneto when he blows up the cliff you're on. Welcome to die, because of poor translation.
The Colossus mutant power sound was a friend of mine's. It was his text message sound for the longest time. And I always think of that when I'm not in a position to make that my text receive sound.
Yeah.
Because that's fantastic.
It is fantastic, but it would also drive everyone else around you insane very quickly.
You're not talking me out of this.
Well, the funny thing also about that arcade is he was the only one who spoke. The other characters, they didn't make noises when they used their special. Like, they didn't say anything.
There was some, like, kind of Foley sounds.
Right.
Like,
there were Foley sounds, and then, like, Professor X spoke to you in the narrative stuff, and a few other characters. But Colossus is the only one who yelled when he used his power.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. And so his power was, so for those who don't know, Colossus is the X-Man who's covered in metal and can cover himself in metal.
He can turn into metal.
Right. Well, his special power, since his power itself was always on, was he created a spark,
a big shockwave that just
came off him.
Yeah,
because science, I guess.
Well, I mean, Wolverine has special power. I mean, his special power is knives for hands.
Right, but in that game, he had a claw spark that he made.
Yeah,
he was multicolored.
He would jump, and there was like a big, like 3 lines just shot out in front of him.
Yeah, the powers didn't make a ton of sense.
Everyone was the Dazzler. They had all kinds of multicolored powers because it was the 80s.
It was.
I am Dazzler, and so are you.
I do love that game though, because it was based on a short animated film called Pride of the X-Men.
It was a pilot for an X-Men series that never got picked up.
Right, so it ended up becoming a one-off animated movie, and the same artist who drew that animation drew the stuff for this game and designed the animation, so all the characters looked like that. Like it's just, and also the boss fights in that were so ridiculous and so stupid.
Yeah.
What I loved about old school arcade games also is you could get away with the most ridiculous shit in some of these games. Like all of the references and ridiculous mini games that were in the Simpsons arcade game. Like one of them, you're in a dream world, and so you have to slap yourself awake. One of the mini games was you have to go after Smithers, so you have to pump up a balloon.
Yeah.
It's just like all of this ridiculous stuff.
And there's a lot of great indie titles that are being developed nowadays, and I mean, they're being released for PC, for Switch, for PS4, for Xbox, and they're not showing up in the arcades as much. Like, you have to make a concerted effort to release a new title in the arcades. I mean, I think one of the big, what you call triumphs would be Killer Queen.
Yes.
which was like the 10-player arcade game, which even for arcades is a little over the top.
Yes.
But you know what? Nowadays, arcades can kind of be the flamboyant release.
Right.
You can have massive rhythm games. You can have stuff with light guns. You can do instruments. You can do a 10-player game. Those things that don't make as much sense in home console.
Right.
Which is why arcades, I mean, they're not really dead.
No.
They don't exist in the form they used to. And I understand that it is probably the greatest money sink, money pit, whatever,
right,
to run what is exclusively an arcade.
Yeah.
Now, this is speaking as people who live on the East Coast in the United States.
Right.
I know there are flourishing arcades in Tokyo.
Yep.
And in other cities in the world. But, you know, the arcade in every town kind of thing just doesn't quite work anymore. I mean, Twin Galaxies is still a thing.
Yep.
But
yeah, they're definitely not as common as they used to be. Although what's interesting to me now is I'm talking about indie games really quick. There's certain indie games coming out or that are iterating that I think would make great arcade games. Like, if you have the treasure trove for Shovel Knight, like I do, and like Geoff does, you are patiently waiting for King of Cards, which is the final full playthrough campaign with one of the knights. Mm-hmm. But they also recently announced that when that comes out, they are also releasing a fighting game attachment where it's 2-on-2, I believe, knights fighting knights, and you can pick any of the knights to fight each other. That would be a perfect damn arcade game.
Oh, yeah.
A Shovel Knight fighter arcade game would be amazing.
Think of adapting Celeste as an arcade game.
That would be really cool.
A lot of those, like, you know, what was once the quarter muncher.
Yeah.
I almost said number muncher. What was once the quarter muncher is now become the platform hell.
Yeah.
You know, Super Meat Boy has its existence, its creation, its very soul was spawned from arcades.
Yeah, totally.
Whether intentionally or not, that is where, you know, games like Haunted Castle have come to.
Yeah, totally. And I think I would love to see some of these indie games recreated as arcade cabinets. I think it'd be pretty cool. I mean, you can also create your own arcade cabinets. There are tons of people who make custom cabinets that they download an emulator and fill it with games and then make like a custom cabinet with custom graphics.
Oh yeah, I've seen projects where you get or make yourself a good arcade fight stick kind of thing. And then you just load a Raspberry Pi in there, load it with stuff, and then you plug that directly into your TV. So you've got what feels like an arcade stick and arcade buttons.
Yeah.
And you can play whatever MAME stuff. There is a company that makes wall-mounted arcade cabinets.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Well, it's funny. We also, while you look that up, we were talking offline about the gag gifts that ThinkGeek are known for. And several years ago, they released a arcade cabinet attachment for the iPad as a gag. Mm-hmm. And then months later, it was a legit thing you could plug your iPad into and play some preloaded arcade games on your damn iPad.
And it's fantastic. Now, the thing I'm thinking of, and there are several, like, DIY or this and that.
Right.
There's a company, like, you want to talk, like, look, do you find yourself with more money than you know what to do with? Do you really want to spend a lot on a simple idea? Why not try Polycade? Polycade is the wall-mounted arcade cabinet that only juts out by, I'm going to get the exact measurements here. It actually doesn't take up a terrible amount of space, which is really why I first looked it up and got really interested in it.
Because imagine just putting it in like a hallway of your apartment, just randomly there, and you could just stop in the hallway and play an arcade game and then move on.
And part of it, exactly. And you can kind of choose the finish, and you can decide what kind of controls are in it. Like if you need a trackball, or like an Arkanoid knob, they'll put that there.
Nice.
And they essentially, it is a very specialized Steam box.
That's cool.
So they load it up with a Steam-like interface of whatever games and all this other stuff, and you can set up. Now, like I said, let me get the exact pricing here as of right now.
As of this moment when we're recording.
As of this moment, this here December while we are recording, the home standard is $3,900. The Home Pro is $4,600. Now, the commercial one, now this is the really cool thing, because this also is a bit of a full circle. They have a whole model in place for setting up a Polycade for businesses.
Ah.
Whether in a bar, an office, a coworker space, like, those sort of like shared workspaces, you have a cool tech startup kind of vibe going on. And I'm not making fun of that. I think those things are awesome. You can get yourself a Polycade in the office, and you do like, it's cheaper, but you also pay like a monthly subscription. It's like $50 a month, and they keep it updated, and you do a contract, and they set all of that up for you. And yeah, I mean, let me get a. It looks a little like that.
Wow, that's actually pretty neat.
It's a very sweet looking little thing.
By the way, if someone from Polycade happens to be listening, we'd love to have you as a sponsor. Give us money.
Look.
I'm just saying, free advertising, but sincerely give us money.
I would love to just try one of these things out. They look like Cadillacs
of arcade cabinets.
And it's again, maybe we don't necessarily need the tilted back CRT. We feel such strong feelings for those shapes, which is why Arcade 1-Up, I believe, is the company that's doing the 3/4 size ones with the little mini collections that you can buy at GameStop for $300.
Yeah.
That's that. Oh man, that's how much it would cost to get like a new system anyway, and then it would be an arcade.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's easy to tell that me and Geoff have some rose-colored glasses when it comes to the arcade systems.
Oh yeah,
because we played a lot of them. But I think
two of my friends, they're married now. They're expecting their first child. I think a lot of their courtship is owed to Dance Dance Revolution. Not entirely. That isn't everything, but I think between marching band and Dance Dance Revolution, that was a lot of the hangout.
Total jocks, these two. Total meatheads.
Oh, yes.
Not nerds at all.
No, not nerds at all. We didn't just go to a Streetlight Manifesto concert. Super cool people.
Something we haven't done in a few episodes because we've been on some more serious and broader topics. Let's get to favorites. We like hearing yours, and we'll share ours. Geoff, I will pose the question to you and then give you my answer. We are going to decide if you had to pick one arcade cabinet as your favorite arcade game of all time, what would that be?
My favorite of all time. Like, I don't have to have it in my home. I don't have to worry about that kind of a thing.
Just, this is your favorite arcade cabinet that you've ever played.
Shit.
For me, it's a tough choice because there are a large variety of arcade cabinets I've played, but I think the most fun per capita, because it's a 2-player game, and for me, arcades are multiplayer experiences, it would be Time Crisis 3. If I had to pick a favorite game, because it was a shooting game that, while very precise, I was actually good at it. And I don't know that I can make that lightning strike twice. So for me, it would be Time Crisis 3 is probably one of my favorite arcade games of all time.
Yeah, I know. That's good. I can speak for Sarah. I know her favorite is Police Trainer.
I forgot about the Police Trainer game.
Like I said, I told the whole Galaga thing, but Police Trainer is look, if there was a home console release of Police Trainer, I would have a CRT in my home.
So you could play it.
Today. Like, we think about it every now and again, because I loved Point Blank games. Yeah. I love all of those. But she's like, is Police Trainer on anything? I'm like, no. Then we don't need a CRT, Geoff. I know which way this is buttered. Because part of me wants to say Dance Dance Revolution.
Obviously.
And that is up there. Bubble Bobble is kind of that was never in any nearby arcades, but every time it was there, that was a sync. You know what? And like, actually, no. Bomani machines are probably my favorite.
Yeah.
Bomani being the whole Konami series of rhythm games.
Yep.
And even more than Dance Dance Revolution, I love Drum Mania.
It was a fun game.
I think more than any instead of Rock Band or anything, Drum Mania was like just the right amount of, it's like playing an instrument, but it's not playing an instrument, but there's some accuracy going on here. And if you play that right, you are going to be exhausted when you're done. That's
pretty much.
That is the point. When they install one of those in Fun and Games, oh my God, I spent way too much money on it. No, I didn't spend enough money on it.
Yeah, if I actually pulled together the amount of money I spent on arcades growing up, it would be an unfathomable amount of money.
And I will spend more.
So we're not going to calculate that. I made the mistake of saying to a friend of mine, my friends Brian and Joe, in college, I spent a lot of time sleeping at my friend Brian's house. Both of us would crash there. We'd play games all night. We'd play games all day. And we would always go to the deli 3 blocks from his house and buy a sandwich. Each of us would buy sandwiches and snacks. We must have spent $40 a day on sandwiches and snacks per person every day for many years. That's a lot of money.
So this just reminds me of a very stupid anecdote.
Okay,
that I would like to share. So one of the things you can do in Dance Dance Revolution is before the song starts, you can do a couple of like modifiers. You can make the arrow scroll a little faster. You can change the color that they are. And there is a thing you can do where it had various names. I always knew it as little mode, where it would only show the arrows that were on the beat. And those are the only arrows you had to do. So if it was like like if there was 8th notes, 16th notes, you didn't have to do those, just quarter notes. And I would pick a song that had a whole section, a good 45 to 60 seconds of offbeats.
Oh, no.
Now, the thing that I used to do at the arcade, and again, like the old quarter line and everything like that, I would do what was called freestyle, where I would put in $2 a play and use both pads, and it would be double. So, like, the charts would be for the whole thing, all 8 buttons. You can move your way around.
Right.
And I would just dance. Now, was I a good dancer? No, but I can move around and I can keep my balance, so I'm good there. And, I'd like leapfrog over the bar and do all these silly things.
Right.
And so one of the silly things I would do is pick this song. I'm trying to remember which one it is. I think it might have been Witch Doctor. And I would do that. That part would come up. I would leave the game, walk to the other side of the arcade to the soda machine, get a Mountain Dew, walk back, open it, chug it, and then go back to playing. In the time that it... And if
you were that guy.
And if I had to keep drinking it after the arrow started, I would do that. Because again, it was still very on the beat, so I'm just like, dun, dun, dun. And it wasn't very fast. And then I could like spin around to do whatever stupid things. And so that was one of those just goofy, show-off things. Before Twitch streaming, before all of that stuff, this is how I showed off.
Oh, Geoff, you were that guy.
I'm still that guy.
That's true. Who are we kidding?
Thank you for...
I'm sorry.
Thank you for at least thinking I might have moved past that. Appreciate it.
Again, I think we need a future series of Matt and Geoff visit arcade venues. But that aside, dear listener, of course, let us know what your favorite arcade games are. There are so many arcade cabinets, and so many that I know I haven't played.
Oh, yeah, and there are ones that, like, when I think of the games that were at Fun and Games, I remember them by where they were located in the arcade.
Yeah.
And there are ones that, I remember playing the Riger arcade cabinet at the pizza shop near my grandparents' house in Vermont. And, like, those specific memories. Maybe the game was good, maybe the game wasn't, but we all have those connections to these cool little things and places. And
that reminds me, the game I hated the most, and I never played it, I just always heard it out of the corner of my like off to my peripheral, was Sinistar.
Beware, I live.
Yeah, that just drove me nuts. I hated it.
Oh yeah, no, there were games. I posted on my Instagram a while ago. I was at Barcade and I saw a game called Panic Park, which is this game that has it's a 2-player game with joysticks on sliders. And so the way you move is where your character moves and does, and it's a bunch of mini games.
Right.
But they can't cross over. So you kind of shove each other, and that's the point of it.
Yeah.
And I saw it and had the most vivid sense memory of seeing the attract mode. And I don't think I've ever played the game. But I remember watching it, and I could see every piece of it, and it's got, like, PS1 as fuck graphics. And I'm pretty sure, and when I posted it, I was like, I don't remember what Jersey Arcade had this. I think it was at 8 on the Break. And I would see it when I would go there for DDR tournaments.
Right.
And I was at 8 on the Break recently, and they don't have it anymore. Duh. I don't think it was a moneymaker.
Right.
But it's just another game that I never played, but I even forgot was a part of my arcade history.
Yeah. there's a lot. Gamers of a certain age are very rooted in arcades, and I know a bunch of our listeners are of our age range. So I really am curious what some of your favorite arcade games are. Tell us some of your shitty arcade experiences. We've all played terrible games as well. So let us know all of that stuff. We really appreciate you guys listening. I'm glad Geoff came up with this topic because I haven't actually talked about arcade cabinets in a while.
We'll probably come back to it at some point soon. There's a lot to mine.
There is a lot to mine from here. Of course, thank you to everyone on Certain Point of View Media, Certain Point of View Podcast, Scruffy Nerf Herders, Another Pass with Case Aiken, Reignite, and ourselves. Yes, I'm thanking ourselves.
Absolutely. Why not? We're good.
We're good.
We're good.
Thank you for listening as always. This is always a pleasure. Please rate, review, subscribe, all of that stuff, and listen to everything else on the network. We really appreciate having everyone who tunes in listen to us ramble about ridiculous shit.
Yes, thank you so much for being a part of this ridiculous conversation that we've been having for almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years.
If you are listening to this episode within the few days of it coming out, I hope you have a very happy new year. I'm sure we'll share our gaming resolutions and things when the time comes. Maybe do a year-end next episode.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know. We'll see where things go, but happy new year. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I'm Geoff Moonen.
I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.